Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Bleakheaven. I am your host, the Birdman. Today with us, we have returning guests. Stanley K. Bostwick, Cassie Bostwick.
The wife.
We have Alex. Welcome one and all. I think we've all came here today to talk about some more Daniel Blake.
Yeah, this
My
is...
favorite thing.
So why is it your favorite thing?
Because it is... Oh gosh, I don't have an answer.
That really sums it up.
It's literally my favorite thing. I'm just not as articulate as Stanley is.
I think the best way to start talking about Daniel Blake is how it was conceived.
Well, Alex was really the trigger for the concept. We kind of all developed the idea of Daniel Blake together. Alex kind of came up with the concept of having a sort of a 1920s Ghostbusters story. So nice. I'll let him talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I've just always really liked sort of that interwar period where it was just all the mob and all that kind of stuff. And it always seems fun to throw in some ghosts, and it's such a less connected time, so that there could just be this weird stuff out there. Whereas nowadays everybody just have a picture of it on their smartphone.
Sure. With a red circle.
Yeah, with a red circle and an arrow pointing at it saying proof. But back in the day, they just had to print about it in a tabloid.
And another big inspiration for it, I think, was like Lovecraftian horror.
Yeah.
Most of Lovecraft stories takes place around that time period as well. The early 19-teens and early 20s sort of time period. Yeah,
and then from that, also just his... I don't know if style's quite the right word, but sort of the way he writes. You know, the monsters aren't out for revenge against you, right? They've got their own plans, and you're just kind of there, like you're the furniture.
And you like, stumble in the way.
Yeah, and you're just kind of like
you're Scooby-Dooing it.
Yeah,
basically.
yeah.
You're like the animals that are.
Yeah, they're like,
in
oh
the
look,
forest.
there's a chair rolling across the road. Okay, I guess that's a problem, but. Not too big of a problem. It's just a chair.
Guess I'll eat it. Extra fiber.
Exactly. I guess I'll just give it this weird looking book with like a bunch of mind breaking secrets for chairs.
But I think that is the big distinction between Lovecraft horror and what we usually write here at Bleakheaven, because Lovecraftian horror is very hinged upon, the hopelessness of everything. Like, nothing matters because there's greater, grander beings doing these things, and humans aren't even a thought to them. And everything is so crushingly inevitable, no matter, like, you're so useless as a human. But in Bleakheaven, there's always that underlay of hope and power that humans have, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think there's a big distinction there, but I have always enjoyed Lovecraftian horror and that sort of feel.
Well, and I think that's a good way to put a more optimistic spin, I suppose, on Lovecraft, is to let there be some human agency.
And I think that's what's always, to me, was missing in Lovecraftian horror was that human agency. And there's other things about Lovecraftian horror. I'm like, I understand in the 1920s that stuff like that could make people go insane, but I'm thinking about today and all the weird stuff we consume in media, and like, would we actually go insane from something dumb like that? It's like, oh, it's just a giant monster.
If you think about anything too long, you'll go insane, I feel like.
So, Griff, how do you feel about Daniel Blake?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we just broke through the ether. I'm now Griff Garrison. No, I thoroughly enjoy it. At first, it was more about the monster stories for me, but now that we've gotten this far into it, it's really just about Daniel. I like how Daniel's story is progressing and how you're learning more about Daniel. I still haven't figured out why he does this, but it's cool that he does. What I like, especially in this previous episode we filmed, recorded, my bad.
We recorded
filmed,
today.
Was the whole war aspect of his character.
His PTSD.
His PTSD, yeah. Which is really cool. I mean, it really brings more to the character in itself. It's not just some dude playing Scooby-Doo, It's a guy who's also, like, just trying to find his way back into the world and everything, and he's going from one battle to another battle. and he's just not seeing it that way yet.
That's something that really drew me into the series as Stanley started writing it, is Daniel is this super complex person who has goals in life, and through this tome, what he's doing without realizing it is he's like working through his own like emotional problems while fighting these really cool monsters, and like we get to see his thoughts and feelings on a bunch of relationships, and it's really cool in that Stanley doesn't explain everything, all the things that Daniel feels. Stanley knows inherently the things that Daniel feels, but Daniel doesn't quite understand how he feels about things. It's not what he thinks about. He doesn't think about his social and economic relationships. He thinks about, why are these monsters here and what are they doing? So it's just really cool to watch him just obliviously go through his regular everyday relationships, and that to come to different conclusions that affect the way he handles monsters.
And I think that was really funny, especially, you know, him bringing, like, Rainey into the fold. Basically, like, Rainey's just going on her rants, you know, like, why aren't you seeing the world around you? And he's all like, shut up, Rainey.
Exactly.
We're talking about ghosts here, Rainey. We're not talking about your drinking problem.
I love their relationship, and I think that's one of the most limiting things, like actually sitting and writing these episodes. I know everybody's perspective, like I know Rainey's perspective and Daniel's perspective, but like I'm limited to telling that story from Daniel's perspective.
Sure.
So it's so difficult for me to like, I gotta pay attention to what Rainey's feeling about, but I can't explain what Rainey's feeling about in the story. I have to write what Daniel sees, and Daniel often doesn't notice or care. So I have to try to find ways for Daniel to mention things that I think are important. I have to find a way for Daniel to think that they're important, but they're not the same reasons I think they're important. And that's the same with everything I mentioned throughout every story. I really enjoy Daniel and Rainey's relationship. It reminds me a lot of relationships within my own family. This fact that they need each other so much. And Rainey really is like the only thing that grounds Daniel in his world. And I think that's really cool. And she needs Daniel just as much as he needs him, but neither of them will admit it.
They're both extremely independent people who are dependent on each other. And it's interesting. I know the characters really well. I came up with Rainey. And I'm constantly talking to Stanley about how Rainey would interact with Daniel in certain situations. Kind of have to have that outside perspective. Like, it's not apparent in the way Daniel views her, but it's apparent by the conclusions of the things that she does, what kind of person she is.
Another thing I like about Rainey is, like, she's sort of this free spirit kind of character at the same time. Cassie did a really good job, and I tried to continue what Cassie put out there with like that flapper mentality, this free-spirited woman of the 20s, and I think that Rainey encapsulates that really well.
I think she does. She's not like the oblivious 1920s. She really pays attention to everything, but at the same time, I mean, if you were living in the 1920s, I would have a drink problem too. I have a drinking problem now. You know?
Well, and it's even worse because Prohibition. So that's one of the main reasons Rainey has a drinking problem, was just Cassie and I wanted to pull in Prohibition.
Yeah.
She drinking antifreeze, or is she drinking...
No, she gets it from a speakeasy, and she still pulls her weight.
She does. That's never her goal, though, going on these investigations. Her goal is never to, like, go bust a monster or whatever.
It seems like her goal is just chilling behind and like, all right, well, we can make it look like we're doing this, but I don't want to go in that creepy building. And yet she still does every time.
She always goes.
She doesn't let Daniel do it alone.
No.
She doesn't think he's smart enough to do it alone.
She's like, I'll whip out my pistol. Let's go to town.
But another aspect I really like about Rainey is she's very much the skeptic. So this is a classic believer and skeptic relationship.
Sure.
So very much like Mulder and Scully sort of situation, where she's obviously the skeptic. Daniel's like eager to believe everything. And no matter what evidence is presented to Rainey, she never really admits that there's something wrong. She's always like, oh, that's a weird-looking hobo, or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, that's one of the most fun parts about her character.
And I think that because she does that, that's just another facet of her relationship with Daniel, and that she doesn't believe it. So when it isn't actually supernatural, she is the one to bring it down and be like, no, look, here's the logical explanation. Or even when it is, like, extremely supernatural and, like, nothing is correct, she's still like, so do you want to go out for a drink now, or what?
She's like, man, those were some weird drugs.
That was strange.
Man, that
we
hobo
should go
really
get
let himself
paid.
go. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff she does.
It's my favorite line ever.
You think that's a hobo?
It was a nice moment of levity. I think their relationship is what causes the comedic relief, though.
Daniel's got that fish out of water vibe to him.
He's always a fish out of water. And in fact, in the next episode we're going to record, it shows how comfortable he is in scary situations versus, like, social situations.
Yeah.
It'd be really funny if later on you had, like, a war buddy tag along on one of these adventures.
He may have something come up.
I don't know anything.
Now people are going to think we got the idea from you. No.
Good. I hope you do.
Oh no. Now we have to pay him.
Stanley and I know the end goal of this. We know what we want to do with the stories. That they're going a lot smoother than I expected. Through both the Birdman's performance and the writing, I'm continually impressed with the way Stanley writes things. It's like he has this inherent knowledge of how the world works. And, you know, just talking to him, you might never find that out. But if you read it and you look at his content, you can see just how deeply he thinks about things, not just what it is in that moment, but what it means in that moment. There's so many reasons I'm just so excited for all the episodes coming out, and I'm really excited for the feedback. I'm really excited for people to become as big of fans of this as I am, because if people are as big of fans as I am, then we'll be millionaires tomorrow night. That's all I have to say.
So one of the things I really liked about this, I guess, iteration of Daniel Blake, because originally when we were doing the story, we were having, like, the police officer going over it, but with this new podcast format, like a meta podcast sort of thing format, one of the things we tried was that episode, the last episode we did with Red X. I thought that was super cool. What do you guys think about, you know, that more experimental, like, in-universe podcast, like, history sort of thing?
Well, I thought it was great because, honestly, it's nothing that's been done before. I've never seen any other podcast like a meta interview. People that are listening to it aren't realizing that it's the Birdman and Red X, you know? It's Griff Garrison and Daryl Stack from Bayside Star, which really adds more to, like, what the interview is actually about. It makes you feel like you're inside Bleakhaven and you're listening to it as if you were in, like, DC and you were in Gotham listening to a podcast from Gotham, like Jack Ryder going on.
Yeah.
It's an interesting way to kind of play around with the narrative, to have this sort of meta framing device that you can use to not just solely track through the diary, but to add just some additional facets to the world. And then, yeah, kind of like what he was saying, you can kind of imagine, like, driving around in your 98 Chevy, just going through Bleakhaven, listening to public radio, and, you know, at like 12 o'clock at night, and you're like, what's this Griff Garrison guy doing?
Yeah, the weirdo podcast
yeah.
in the middle of the night. It was a really fun episode to record and to come up with. Alex helped me write that one because I was struggling coming up with what they were going to talk about. But I think it went off really well. Red X did a really good job. Like, I knew he would, because, like, that's what he's built his career off of, is doing that kind of stuff.
Doing a good job.
Thanks for the input, Cass.
I've never tried that. Is that a good way to build a career?
You're doing a good job.
Yeah, you were saying?
First of all, I'm really grateful that he even came and did it, like, got on the call with us and did that. That was pretty awesome. And he did some promoting on his channel for Bleakhaven. We sponsored one of his videos. That was fun. I was impressed with his ability to give Daryl a personality, because Alex and I we're just kind of writing the bare minimum information, like this is what you need to say, and I'm like, we'll kind of play it loose, and you can pull a personality out of your butt, and we'll see how it goes. And he did a really good job, because, like, I don't know, you could feel that tension between Daryl and Griff. That's one of my favorite parts about that episode. That might be one of my favorite episodes of all time, because of how much tension there is. Daryl's like, no, you're dumb. He called you an idiot several times without saying you're an idiot.
Yeah,
I loved it.
Subtly being condescending the whole time.
And you know what's funny about it? Is that I didn't realize it until I went back and listened to it while I was at work. And then I listened to him just letting me have it. And that's when I messaged you when I was at work, and I was all like, man, Daryl Stack's kind of a dick. It's been difficult, but it's been fun at the same time, because it's like, it's a new thing that I'm learning. First time doing voice acting ever on anything, and I do mess up on the reading a lot.
I commend you, and I thank you for doing this, because, like, as a first time for, like, a thing, this is, like, 5 different things in one. This is an audiobook, you gotta do voices, and you gotta play a character all on your own, and you gotta pull all of that together, because this is something that I haven't really seen before. It's a new kind of... It's an experimental thing we're playing around with. So.
Sure. Every episode's been a change for me. And I like that, because I don't like doing the same thing twice, you know? I like to constantly change things up. Of course, there's a lot of things that you want to keep in the podcast and everything to make it sound some of the same stuff.
Consistency stuff.
But, you know, changing it up really helps too. And that's why I like doing, like, the additional voices and stuff in it. I don't want each character to feel the same. You know, each character has their own takeaway of, like, interacting with Daniel and Rainey, and, like, that's what I thoroughly enjoy doing. Plus, I like doing different voices. The most challenging episode was Red X, like, for me, because you guys did have a whole format for us to read through, but you're also like, I want you to improvise.
It was a big experiment for us, because we're like, it's semi-scripted, but improvise it. Go where your heart leads.
Yeah.
You took it like a champ, man.
Well, it was cool, because, like, you had prompts, you had topics, but at the same point, you're like, I don't want Griff Garrison to be reading prompts. I want Griff Garrison to speak out of his own mind. And, I mean, Griff Garrison being a new character, I've really based him off of all of my podcasting experience. And I've just been doing that improv within that was just really cool. I don't think most people ever get the chance to do that. I like being Griff Garrison.
I wasn't there while it was recorded, but afterwards listening, like, you guys are so fluid. You worked off of each other so well. And I'm just honestly just continually impressed with you, with the way you're doing the podcast. Because there's a lot of things that we don't ask you to do. Yeah. Like, all of the voices and the uniqueness, like, I've personally given you an out, like, you don't have to, like, make each voice so unique. We understand there's going to be a lot of them. And you're just like, no, I got this. And then you just impress me with what you come up with. And it takes you a second sometimes, but that second makes it so much better. Whereas I know a lot of people who would just go for it and not take the time and consideration that you do with each of the characters. It just makes it all the more real to me.
I want to put that in everything I do. That's why I like doing voice acting. That's the fun of it all. I don't want to do the same thing twice. I want to do different things and different characters, and who knows, one of these days I might have an iconic voice for some iconic character, and that would be awesome for me.
Yes.
But right now I like experimenting with different accents and different voices, and I'm gonna keep doing that.
That's good.
Good.
Well, I think that's another one of the reasons we got you to do it, is because you're always trying to push yourself to do better, and that's one of the big things at Bleakheaven that I am proud of us all for doing. That's something I think that is crucial for every member of the team to have, so that's one of the big reasons you're still here.
So I think one of the reasons you're still here is because we know where you live.
Do you really?
The message on your wall in blood, I feel like, was very helpful in keeping you on this team.
Yeah, I know. I had to do a lot of repainting that day. And, you know, coming from a colorblind guy, like, painting isn't my greatest thing. I've gotten fired from multiple maintenance jobs for that reason. Painting is horrible. I'm no Pablo Picasso. What can I say?
I have a question for Cassie. How did you come up with Rainey?
Oh, I picked out all the most ridiculous traits I could, and I threw them into a person, and it worked out. That's exactly how that happened. Heck, she's into crystal magic, okay? She charges her crystals every full moon. All right?
For a person that's so skeptical
Right?
of this stuff.
Yeah.
She doesn't believe in ghosts. She doesn't believe in monsters. She works at a speakeasy. She carries around brass knuckles because of all of the bar fights she's been in.
Sweet.
And she's in the 20s, and everybody in the 20s just completely, writes her off as just the secretary, right?
Yeah.
And then she pulls, ridiculous stunts, and she talks over Daniel all the time. She is there, and she is going to be important whether or not anybody else decides she's going to be.
I have a question. If this was going to be a live-action film, who would you cast as Rainey and Daniel?
Man.
Oh, that's a good question.
I have no idea.
What's our budget?
You got full Disney money, but none of the production.
So-
Personally, mine would be Daniel as Jeffrey Dean Morgan. I think he would be pretty good.
I think the big thing with Daniel is I wanted a hero who wasn't a hero by any other terms than what he did. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So he doesn't look like a hero. I always picture him as kind of a short, kind of pudgy guy.
Sure.
With a big mustache, and he's balding. That's why he always has that hat that Donald wears.
So you're talking Philip Seymour Hoffman?
Yeah.
That would be brilliant.
So,
Danny DeVito.
not...
Anyways, I started shooting. Ghosts! I'm the trash man!
For Daniel, I wanted a hero that, wasn't conventionally attractive and wasn't immediately likable. I know there's a lot of heroes who aren't really likable immediately by other characters. Spider-Man, for example. Sure. Obviously, nobody in universe likes Spider-Man. And that's sort of the same thing with Daniel, is nobody really likes Daniel, and that's something I wanted to get across, and I didn't want that to necessarily be Daniel's fault. He's a weird, creepy dude, but he's got a good heart, and he always tries to do the right thing, even though he gets so obsessed and focused on something. But like I said, nobody likes him. The people he talks to don't really like him. Some people can warm up to him. Later on, there's a mafia stuff get involved, and that was kind of teased in the last episode too. There's some mafia involvement and stuff. They call him Creepy Dan. He's not a fan of that, but
no, I'm Creepy Dan.
He's totally the B-plot side character that we're writing as the main character, and we don't see him through the eyes of all the people around him. He hints at the way people treat him, but he has no idea either. So he could be a well-spoken, charismatic dude in some episodes, and then you remember that he's completely socially inept, and Rainey reminds him frequently.
Most of the stuff we write here is superhero stuff, classic, well, I guess not classic, but general superhero, heroic deeds, stuff like that. And Daniel is a character that's instrumental in that later, so a lot of the stuff going on in the Tome of Daniel Blake goes into effect in the main superhero comics, Welcome to Bleakhaven. There's stuff that Daniel does and deals with that pop up in those comic books 100 years later.
Sure.
But I wanted Daniel to not have any superpowers, but he's constantly interacting with superpowered and supernatural beings. It's kind of like Alex Ross's Marvels.
Sure.
Where that's from the perspective of a normal journalist.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I wanted to do with Daniel Blake. Even though this isn't a comic book, it's experimental podcast audiobook thing. But I wanted to take that normal person feel, even though Daniel's not normal, he's a weirdo, but he's throwing himself into the supernatural world, the scary things, the unexplainable things. And I want Griff to kind of parallel Daniel as well as we move forward in that regard, in this world of heroes.
I thought of what we could just call this, the Metacast. That's because that fits it perfectly.
It is a Metacast.
It's a Metacast.
Alex provides a lot of the consistency that we have. Stanley does a whole bunch of research to keep it a certain way, but if we ever have historical questions, like, Alex is the man to talk to. Honestly, you provide so much. Even when you're not around, your influence is there, and we think of, like, oh, but Alex would know how to do this.
Yeah, and oftentimes I'll text Alex and make him help me write things. And that's one of the hardest parts about the Tome of Daniel Blake, and I'm sure I screw this up constantly, is keeping the language modern enough so everybody can understand it, because Daniel doesn't use a lot of slang anyway, but also throwing in terms and different phrases and sayings from the time period, and like even from this time period, and I'm like, I have to look it up. I throw in some, idiom or something. I have to go look it up. Did they use this in the 20s? Sort of thing. And that's been one of the most frustrating things. But Cassie's right. Alex understands history way better than most people I know. And that's one of the reasons I'm so comfortable letting him write the Irwin comic book, which takes place during Cold War era type stuff and a little bit before then. Like, I'm so comfortable letting him write that because he understands that time period better than anybody else I know.
I can't think of any other person that we would trust to just be like, yeah, you can write this comic book. I trust that you'll do all your research and then it won't be stupid and ridiculous.
That's true, yeah.
Like, there's...
Promises.
We put a lot of trust in you. You have this weight of the world real quick.
Thanks.
What I found was easy today with our episode, recording this previous episode, was that I had 3 different people to bounce ideas off of. I had the writer. I had another writer.
Just call me the wife.
The wife.
That is my title officially, and I accept it.
That's what the business card says.
I feel like people are going to get mad at me.
That's what the business card says.
We did have one guy who was like, yeah, and you make all the decisions, right? And I'm like, no. I'm literally just the wife, and that's where I'm going to be.
That's not true. Bleakheaven wouldn't exist without you. But
yeah, well, that's true. But everybody knows that's what a wife does.
Having all 3 of you guys just come in and give me all of your ideas, especially with all the characters in this previous episode. Especially when it came to accents with you. Like, we're all usually on the same wavelength, but the best part about it is that, like, you guys provide each different... Wow, how would that work? How would this character work? How would this voice work? And, like...
It's a nice discussion.
I've never heard of a Cockney accent.
Take a break from Daniel Blake. You should talk about Sister City.
No.
Wow. All right.
So that wraps up this episode. That's all I have to say about that.
Coming soon. Trademark.
No.
Not coming soon.
My brain says it's not ready yet. I have ADHD. I don't know.
No.
I've been thinking about Daniel Blake like pretty consistently.
I loved how absolute she's like, no.
All right. What more do you have to say about Daniel Blake then?
Oh, I love it so much. It's a bit problematic. I'm a bit obsessed with the storyline. Out of all of the things we're doing, I'm working on Mark's. I've been there for, like, all of the comic series, and there's a lot of backlogged comic series that are just waiting for art to come out. And I've been working on Emberwood Sister City, which is our RPG, like, tabletop thing, which is a monster. The one thing that I know that I can work on and continuously enjoy is the Tome of Daniel Blake. That's the most fun for me, especially just because of, like, the stuff that's in between the lines. Like, I'm a very emotionally driven person in that that's the thing that I pay attention to the most, is I pay attention to, like, how relationships work. This doesn't mean that I'm socially adept at any level. It just means that that's what I pay attention to. That's something that is in Daniel Blake so much, is just the relationships. It's really cool. And then you get freaking awesome monsters mixed in with that.
Yeah, we really haven't even talked about them. Like Zero, or the consumer.
I want to tell you something about Exero the consumer. Exero is Latin for consuming. Cassie tried really hard to get me to drop the consumer off of that, but I'm like, no,
Consumer
it sounds
the
cool.
consumer?
So it's consumer the consumer.
Consumer the consumer.
It's Latin for consuming fire, specifically. But Cassie really wanted me to get rid of the consumer off that, but I thought it sounded cool. Birdman thought it was cool.
I thought it was cool.
Nah, it's dumb.
The monsters are a lot of fun. Alex, well, we all kind of come up with the monsters together. It's a hard thing when I start each episode, because I'm like, all right, what's the monster? What is Daniel and Rainey going to have to fight this time, or face, or whatever, or interact with, because sometimes I can't fight it. Exero the Consumer was a fun one. I'm not sure where the concept specifically came from, but Alex gave me the concept, and then I kind of put a fresh coat of paint on it.
I mean, in my personal opinion, like, so far, she has been the most terrifying monster. We're only a few episodes in. I mean, we're like on episode 4 now.
One of the things I really liked about her specifically was that she was like, she captures some of that inevitable horror. She's always pursuing, and like, they don't know. All the monsters we have are so. I try to make them as unique as possible and push all the other writers to make them as unique as possible, so that we have less of an understanding of them and can gain more of an understanding throughout the stories. And Daniel Blake specifically is the best place to kind of play with these monsters, because Daniel and Rainey obviously, for the most part, always find a way out. But like in the last episode, there's sometimes a price that's really heavy to pay. And so I think that's one of the coolest part about Exero is she was a monster that's so inevitable and like unstoppable. You know, and the only way to stop her is to make a sacrifice. I don't know, I just thought that was a really cool concept.
What I like about it is that it's not, each episode has a different take, you know? It's not, you're not listening to it expecting, is this going to be a filler episode, or is this going to be like some other episode? You can go into each episode and they're all different, but they're all the same at the same time. Of course, you're going to have Daniel and Rainey doing Daniel and Rainey shenanigans, but at the same time, each monster they fight or encounter is just different, you know? They really have to think of new ways to approach each situation. And that's what I liked so much about that episode, was because the episode before that, you know, they basically like, oh, let's just get out of here. You know?
Screw this!
But with Exero, they were like, oh, well, we can't really run away, or, you know, things are going to get worse than they already are.
Things are really bad.
Yeah.
Really, really bad.
Things that escalated quickly.
Yeah.
We went from having a picnic in the park to hellfire from the skies.
I don't know if they were having a picnic at any point during Daniel Blake.
Dogs and cats living together.
That brings up another good point. I wanted to give it like that Ghostbusters feel.
Yeah.
Like 1920s Ghostbusters, the Bleakheaven oddity observation.
It really does,
Or
though.
Boo.
They're just rolling around in their Oldsmobile, you know.
Shotguns in the back.
Shotguns.
Drunk passenger at all times.
Heck yeah. Of course, she's not the drunk driver, though, is she? DD.
Yeah, when she tries to, it doesn't end well.
One of my other favorite parts about Daniel Blake is the fact that he tries to speak to most of these monsters.
Yeah.
And it usually doesn't end up well. Like, these are usually like beings that don't care about humans. They don't care to interact with them
Could
a lot of the time.
literally not care less.
Or they can't speak to humans. And Daniel's always like, hello.
How was your childhood?
Tell me what's going on.
He's like those freaking Ghost Adventure dudes walking into, like, a supernatural event. Like, he's all like, so you're the devil!
That's exactly what it is. He's like, okay, how's it going?
I see you're a shrieking ball of protoplasm. Is it hard to find pants?
He understands the world as more than it seems. And like you said, every single monster they face is different. Yeah. So some of them talking will do good, but others you just need your gun. And others, there's nothing you can do.
I'm just excited for the episode where Daniel and Rainey show up to an event armed to the teeth, while everybody else is just there casually.
Oh yeah.
That's all the context I'll give, but it's
This is just Daniel's like slow descent into becoming Blade.
More like Van Helsing.
He's a parapsychologist.
If Blade were a nerd.
If Blade,
yeah, Daniel's like gigantic.
Blade were
nerd.
a balding nerd.
I look forward to more episodes. I'm really excited to keep writing it and coming up with more concepts, because I think monsters are some of my favorite things to write. So this is a fun like monster of the week sort of deal, and that's how Alex actually pitched it to me, as like a fun monster of the week sort of thing. And then Cassie and I came up with Daniel and Rainey, and then we just started working on the story together.
I think it's all coming together quite well. We're gonna go ahead and finish out
suffering.
Yes, Alex says we're gonna end all of our suffering and yours too. Honestly, I can speak on behalf of everybody here where I say go and listen to some Daniel Blake. It's well worth your time. Okay. We will see you guys on the next episode. This has been Welcome to Bleakhaven, and I'm the Birdman.